In video number 8 of the SAT Grammar Bootcamp, we're going to discuss idioms and idiom errors on the SAT. Now, most of the time when you hear about idioms in life, you hear of them in the context of particular expressions that have particular meanings that you can't really figure out from the literal definitions of the words of that phrase. So an example would be something like kick the bucket as a euphemism for dying. Now, you can't really tell necessarily that kick the bucket, those literal, if you could think of the literal picture of someone kicking a bucket, means someone dying. So literally, it means something, or seems to mean something, but figuratively, it has another meaning. Another example would be spill the beans, as a way of revealing something that perhaps should have been kept secret. It's not clear from the literal meaning of those words that spill the beans would mean that. Now, that's idioms normally, but that's not what I mean when we talk about idioms on the SAT. For the SAT, most of the time, it's going to be the use of prepositions with other words such as verbs, adjectives, nouns, anything like that. Sometimes it'll be conjunctions, so particular ways of connecting phrases and connecting clauses. And other kinds of idioms you might see are word pairs, and I'll actually have a video later on word pairs. Things like not only, but also. So basically, idioms are just words that go together for no real reason. That is to say, they have some kind of figurative meaning, or at least they have some kind of meaning that just happens, right? There's no rule that tells us, for instance, that capable of goes together rather than capable to. So for instance, if we had a sentence like this on the SAT, he is capable to defeat his enemies. There's no rule that tells us that to is wrong here because it should be of. It's just something that you need to know as a language speaker, that you would use of with capable here, and it would be capable of defeating, in this case as well, his enemies. Right? This is an idiom. It's just an expression that goes together. Another example would be something like this. The rules of baseball are different than the rules of hockey. So this may sound right to you, and frankly that's because a lot of times we do use different than when we shouldn't. Sometimes it's right, but a lot of times it's wrong. Because actually the preposition that should go with different in this case should be from. So the rules of baseball are different from the rules of hockey. Now there are cases where different than is actually right. I won't go into that because most of the time on the SAT they're going to look for different from, not different than. So what can you do to study these prepositions, study these idioms? Well, you can go online and Google something like SAT idioms or SAT idioms prepositions, anything like that. And you will find lists out there, but I will caution you about spending a lot of time studying idioms because sometimes, old errors don't necessarily repeat. They might, but they might not. So if you spend all this time learning these old errors and these old idioms and they're not going to use it again, what's the point? Sometimes a new idiom could be totally fresh and new, and there's really no way for you to predict the idioms ahead of time. So in that case, you can spend some time learning some old idioms, like different from I think is important, capable of is important, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time, especially because there's generally only going to be about 1 to 2 questions per test on idiom errors. So, and even if, let's say you're going for an 800, you could miss that 1 or 2 questions and still be within the range of an 800. And if you're going for a 600 writing, fretting about idioms is going to be a complete waste of your time if you're still missing subject-verb agreement or pronoun agreement or one of those major errors that comes up again and again. So that's why you can go ahead, you can study idioms if you'd like, but I say, your better use of your time is going to be to study the major error categories first. Now, one tip I can tell you though, now that you know idioms are on the test, you know that you might be responsible to pick up an incorrect idiom. If you ever see, for instance, a preposition underlined, then there's a good chance that there might be something wrong with it. I mean, not always, but you should check it, right? Check the preposition. Say to yourself, does that go with the word that comes before it or the phrase? Right? Does that go with what follows it? Does it fit in the context? And a lot of times, if that idiom error is a preposition, you might be able to pick up on it just by realizing that these errors happen. You want to kind of trust your language instinct, right? You speak English, most of you, I assume, English is your first language, so trust your language instinct to guide you. And with a little knowledge of what they can test, sometimes studying massive lists is not that critical. Okay, so that was idioms. Next, we're going to move on to some other topics related to prepositions. or excuse me, for pronouns.